A 10-year anniversary. The venue, the Orion Club, the most exclusive rooftop in the city, a place money alone can't buy. Marcus Bishop believed he'd secured it, a symbol of his power, the perfect stage to discard his quiet wife, Elara, for his new lover. He smirked as he brought his mistress to the party ready for his triumph. He was prepared for tears, for screams, for a scene. The one thing he never prepared for, the name on the building's deed. He didn't just bring his lover to his wife's party. He brought her to his wife's house. The 10th anniversary. Tin, aluminum, flimsy, disposable metals. Marcus Bishop found this fitting, though he'd never say it aloud. He looked across the breakfast table at his wife, Elara. She was, as always, immaculate, dressed in a simple cream-colored cashmere sweater, her dark hair pulled back in a neat chignon. She was reading a physical newspaper. Not a tablet, a newspaper. The Wall Street Journal. He'd long mistaken her quiet analog habits for a lack of ambition. "Elara, darling," he said, not looking up from his phone where he was approving the latest wire transfer for his new condo. "About tonight. I've handled everything. You just need to be ready by 7. Wear the blue dress, the sapphire one." Elara slowly lowered the paper, her grey eyes unnervingly calm. "The blue one. Of course, Marcus. You said the Orion Club. I'm surprised you got a reservation. I hear the waiting list is 3 years long." Marcus finally looked up, a smirk playing on his lips. He was a man who looked like a casting call for corporate raider. Sharp suit, expensive watch, and a smile that never quite reached his eyes. "Please, darling. Waiting lists are for civilians. I made a few calls, pulled some strings. The general manager, a man named Julian Vance, owes a friend of mine a favor. It's done. It's the best. Only the best for our 10th. He thought of how the best was currently waiting for him in his downtown condo, a condo Elara knew nothing about. He thought of Chloe. Elara simply nodded, folding the newspaper with precise, economical movements. "That was very clever of you, Marcus. I'll just pop by Carla's patisserie this afternoon to pick up a small cake for dessert. Shall I? As a little thank you." "Don't bother," he said, standing and adjusting his Savile Row tie. "They're handling everything. I've commissioned a 6-tier masterpiece. You just focus on looking beautiful. It's what you do best." He kissed the air near her cheek and left the scent of his expensive cologne lingering like a pollutant in their sterile white and glass penthouse. Elara sat alone for a long moment. She picked up her own phone. She did not call the patisserie. She speed-dialed a single number. "Julian?" she said, her voice changing. The quiet, passive tone was gone, replaced by a clipped, authoritative alto. "He's on his way to the office. Yes, he's very proud of himself. He thinks he pulled strings to get his own anniversary party at your club." A warm, amused voice replied on the other end. "He's also very proud of the invoice I sent him, which you paid from your personal account 5 minutes later. The man doesn't check his own bank statements, does he?" "Elara, he only checks the balance of his accounts, Julian, never the joint one. He thinks it's for household expenses, groceries, my little charity luncheons. He considers it beneath him. And the guest list. He sent his final version this morning. There's a new addition, a Ms. Chloe Jennings, listed as his executive assistant." Elara's knuckles went white as she gripped the phone. "Yes, I expected that. She is to be admitted without question. She is in fact the guest of honor. Is everything else in place?" "The legal team is on standby. The board members have been quietly summoned. and the security detail is briefed. They are all looking forward to tonight, boss." "Thank you, Julian," Elara said. She hung up and looked out the window down at the city that bustled and thrummed below. Marcus thought he was the king of this city. He thought Bishop Dynamics was the pillar holding it up. He thought she was just one of his pretty possessions. Marcus had forgotten who she was before she was a bishop. People always forgot about the Vances. The Vances had built the pillars, and tonight she was going to remind him. The Orion Club was not just a venue. It was a statement. It occupied the top 3 floors of the city's most iconic skyscraper, the one that pierced the clouds. It had no sign. There was no gaudy entrance. There was only a single unmarked obsidian door on a quiet side street, manned by 2 men in impeccably tailored black suits. When Marcus and Elara pulled up in their black Bentley, Marcus all but jumped out, leaving the doorman to help his wife. He strode to the entrance, puffing his chest. "Marcus Bishop, party for 80. The doorman didn't even look at a list. He simply inclined his head. "Welcome, Mr. Bishop. Mrs. Bishop. We've been expecting you. Mr. Vance is awaiting you upstairs." They were escorted to a private elevator, all brushed bronze and dark mahogany. The elevator didn't have buttons. It operated on a key. It opened directly into the main lounge. The room was breathtaking. One entire wall was a floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the glittering city skyline. A grand piano played softly in the corner. Waitstaff moved with silent, balletic grace, offering champagne and complex hors d'oeuvres. All of their friends were already there. The bankers, the real estate moguls, the other corporate sharks and their wives. Marcus was in his element, clasping hands, accepting backslaps. "Marcus, you old dog." "How did you score this place?" shouted one of his associates, a man named Peterson. "You know me, Frank," Marcus boomed. "I get what I want, and my Elara deserves the best." He wrapped a possessive arm around Elara's waist. She smiled a perfect, polished, empty smile and accepted a glass of champagne. Then the elevator doors opened again. A young woman stepped out. She was stunning in the way a sports car is stunning, all bright red, sharp curves and aggressive lines. Her red dress was cut dangerously low. Her blonde hair was platinum, and her eyes were fixed like a predator's on Marcus. This was Chloe Jennings. She walked directly to Marcus, ignoring Elara completely. "Marcus, darling," she purred loud enough for the nearest cluster of guests to hear. "I'm so glad I made it. The traffic was hell." Marcus, to his credit, looked momentarily panicked. He hadn't expected her to be so bold so soon. "Chloe," he said, his voice tight. "So glad you could make it. You know my wife Elara, of course." Chloe finally turned her gaze on Elara. It was openly dismissive. She looked Elara up and down, from her elegant but modest sapphire dress to her understated pearls. "Oh, right, the wife. Hi, cute dress. Is it vintage?" Before Elara could reply, Marcus steered Chloe away. "Let me get you a drink, Chloe. You must be parched." Elara watched them go. She saw the whispers. She saw the other wives looking at her, some with pity, some with a cruel, satisfied schadenfreude. They had all been waiting for the bulletproof Marcus Bishop to slip. And here it was, in a tight red dress, holding his hand at his own anniversary party. Elara simply took a sip of her champagne. She caught the eye of the general manager, Julian Vance, who was standing near the grand staircase. He was a handsome, silver-haired man, his suit even more expensive than Marcus's. He gave her a subtle, concerned look. Elara responded with the smallest, slightest nod. "Everything is proceeding as planned." Julian nodded back, then moved toward the center of the room. The trap was set. The bait had been taken. Now they just had to wait for the groom to spring it on himself. The party was by all accounts a spectacular success. The food was exquisite, the champagne flowed like water, and the view was intoxicating. Marcus, however, was growing more intoxicated on his own ego. He had Chloe on one side, Elara on the other, though he had barely spoken to his wife in an hour. He was holding court, telling a loud, boastful story about a recent hostile takeover. Chloe hung on his every word, her laughter just a little too loud, her hand finding its way to his arm, his shoulder, his back. The guests were masters of polite society. They pretended not to see. They engaged Elara in trivial conversation, which she handled with her usual placid grace. "Elara, the new wing on the museum, is just divine," said one woman, Mrs. Atherton. "Your foundation's work is just so sweet." "Thank you, Cynthia. We're just happy to support the arts," Elara replied. "You're so modest," Chloe cut in, sliding into the conversation. "I find charity work so quaint, like a hobby. I'm more of a hands-on girl. I'm in mergers and acquisitions. What's that saying, go big or go home? Right, Marcus?" Marcus beamed at her. "That's my girl, a real shark." Elara smiled. "Oh, I agree, Miss Jennings. It's so important to go big." Finally, Marcus signaled the pianist, and the music softened. He clinked a knife against his crystal glass. The room quieted. "Friends," he began, pulling Chloe just a little closer to him. Elara stood on his other side, a statue of wifely support. "Thank you all for coming. 10 years. A decade." He looked at Elara. His smile was thin reptilian. "A decade with this woman, Elara. She's been a wonderful partner, a great hostess, a true asset to my brand. We've built an empire." The crowd applauded politely. Elara's expression did not change. "But as any good businessman knows," Marcus continued, his voice dropping into what he thought was a sincere, intimate tone, "empires must evolve. They must adapt. You can't stay stagnant. You have to shed old skin, old ideas, and embrace the new. You have to be bold." He paused, scanning the faces of his powerful friends. He was feeding off their attention. "This party isn't just about celebrating the past," he announced, his voice rising with theatrical drama. "It's about celebrating the future, my future." And then he did it. He dropped Elara's hand and grabbed Chloe's, pulling her in front of him. He held her hand aloft like a trophy. "Chloe Jennings," he declared, "is not just my executive assistant. She is my partner. She is my future. We are in love." The silence in the room was absolute. It was so quiet, Elara could hear the ice shifting in Mrs. Atherton's glass. Chloe beamed a triumphant, venomous smile aimed directly at Elara. She thought this was her coronation. "And I wanted you all to be the first to know," Marcus said, his arrogance swelling to fill the vacuum. "Elara and I have discussed this, and she has graciously agreed to step aside so that I can pursue my happiness. So let's toast, not to the last 10 years, but to the next 10, to new beginnings." He raised his glass. Chloe raised hers. Not a single other person in the room moved. All eyes were on the wife. They were waiting for the breakdown, the tears, the screaming, the accusations. Elara Bishop simply stood there, a small, thoughtful smile on her face. Marcus's arm was still in the air, his toast hanging in the dead, silent air. He frowned, his bravado wavering. This was not the reaction he'd expected. He'd planned for Elara to burst into tears and flee, allowing him to play the sympathetic, pained husband who had tried to make it work. Chloe's triumphant smile faltered. She looked at Elara. "Well," she hissed, "aren't you going to leave?" Elara turned her head, very slowly, to look at the younger woman. "Leave," she repeated, as if the concept was foreign. "But the party is just getting started." She then tapped her own champagne glass with a perfectly manicured fingernail. The tink-tink-tink sound was as sharp as a gunshot in the silent room. "Marcus, darling," she said, her voice clear and carrying not a tremor in it. "That was quite the speech. Shedding old skin. It was very poetic." Marcus lowered his arm, his eyes narrowing. "Elara, don't make this difficult." "I have no intention of making it difficult," she said, stepping forward. She was now the center of the room. "I just feel as your wife of 10 years, I should be allowed to say a few words of my own. Don't you?" She didn't wait for an answer. She turned to the stunned crowd. "Hello, everyone," she said, as if she were at one of her charity luncheons. "I want to thank you all for coming. Marcus is right. 10 years is a significant milestone. He's also right that he's built an empire. Bishop Dynamics is a force to be reckoned with. It's been featured in Forbes and the Wall Street Journal." Marcus relaxed slightly. He crossed his arms, smirking. She was going to praise him. Good. This was the classy, dignified exit he'd wanted. "He told me," Elara continued, her voice light and conversational, "that to get this venue, the Orion Club, he had to pull strings, that he called in favors, that the general manager, Julian Vance, owed him one." She turned and smiled at the silver-haired man who was watching from the sidelines. "Julian, is that true? Do you owe Marcus a favor?" Julian Vance stepped forward, a polite, deferential smile on his face. "No, Mrs. Bishop. I'm afraid I've never spoken to Mr. Bishop before tonight. All correspondence was handled through his office, and all invoices were settled in full from your personal trust." The first crack appeared in Marcus's armor. What are you talking about?" "I handled the booking." "No, darling," Elara said, patting his arm. "You didn't. You see, you couldn't. You're not a member." Chloe laughed. "What are you talking about? We're here. Obviously we're members." "No," Elara said, her smile vanishing, replaced by a cold, flat indifference. "You are guests. I am the member. Or rather, I am the owner. You see, Marcus made a slight error in his assumptions. He's made quite a few of them, actually." The collective gasp was audible this time. Marcus's face, which had been flushed with triumph, turned a pale, sickly white. What did you say?" he stammered. "Oh, Julian," Elara said, turning to her general manager. "I don't think I've ever formally introduced you. Julian, this is my husband, Marcus Bishop. Marcus, this is Julian Vance. My cousin." Julian stepped forward and extended a hand, which Marcus did not take. "Mr. Bishop, a pleasure to finally meet the man my cousin has been managing for the last decade." "Vance," Marcus whispered the name, finally clicking in his brain. "Vance, as in Vance Hospitality Group." "The very same," Elara said, taking center stage. "You all know me as Elara Bishop, the charity wife, the socialite. Marcus, you always did find my family's old money so quaint. You thought my father was just a quiet old man who lived off dividends. You never bothered to ask what he did." She began to pace slowly, her voice resonating with a power no one in that room had ever heard from her. My great-grandfather started a small hotel in New York a century ago. That small hotel became the Vance Hospitality Group. It owns at current count 54 luxury properties worldwide. The St. Regis in Rome, the Admiralty in London, and this, my little passion project, the Orion Club. You're not just in my club, Marcus, you're in my building, the one my name is on the deed of. My maiden name, of course. Chloe looked as if she'd been slapped. You're lying. This is a trick. Is it? Elara asked. She nodded to Julian. Julian, if you would. Julian signaled to his staff. Instantly, 2 large screens that had been disguised as modern art on the walls flickered to life. The logo of the Vance Hospitality Group appeared, followed by an organizational chart. At the very top, under CEO and Chairwoman, was the name Elara Vance Bishop. I've been running my family's company since my father passed away 5 years ago, Elara stated. From the home office you never bothered to enter. Between those quaint charity luncheons and my sweet little museum board meetings, you thought I was planning seating charts, Marcus. I was acquiring hotel chains. Marcus was hyperventilating. But, my company, Bishop Dynamics, I built that. Did you? Elara asked, her voice laced with ice. That's the second and far more critical error you've made. You see, Marcus, Elara continued, you started Bishop Dynamics with your own money. That's true. You had vision. But about 6 years ago, you over-leveraged. You were desperate for a capital infusion to save yourself from bankruptcy after that disastrous commodities deal in Singapore. Remember? Marcus's face was ashen. He remembered. It was the one secret he thought he'd buried. You thought you'd found a silent partner, Elara said. A mysterious, reclusive holding company based in Switzerland that bought a 51% majority stake. A partner who never attended board meetings, who always voted by proxy and who let you keep the title of CEO. You just had to send them their dividends. You thought you'd gotten a sweet deal from some old European aristocrat. She clicked a small remote. The image on the screens changed. It was now the corporate structure of Bishop Dynamics and that Swiss holding company. I've always loved Switzerland, Elara said wistfully. The mountains, the chocolate, and the financial privacy. The chart zoomed in, revealing the sole signatory of the Swiss holding company. It was her, Elara Vance Bishop. You were the silent partner, Marcus whispered, staggering back. I was the majority shareholder, Elara corrected him. I saved your company. My company, technically. I've owned you, Marcus, for 6 years. I let you play CEO. I let you splash your name on Forbes. I let you believe you were the king, all while I was the one signing the checks that kept your crown from toppling. She turned to Chloe, whose entire body was shaking. And you, Ms. Jennings. You work in mergers and acquisitions, a real shark. Well, you're not very good at your job. You started an affair with your boss, thinking he was the most powerful man in the city. You never ever did your due diligence. You slept with the C-suite, but you never bothered to find out who was on the board. No. Marcus groaned, clutching his head. No, this isn't possible. Oh, it's very possible, Elara said. And as the majority shareholder, I believe I am entitled to call an emergency vote, especially when the CEO has proven himself to be, what's the term? Ah, yes. Morally bankrupt and a fiduciary risk. She looked around the room. Mr. Peterson, Mr. Davies, Mrs. Atherton, you're all on the board. You were all summoned here tonight, not just for an anniversary, but for an emergency meeting of the board of Bishop Dynamics, all in favor of removing Marcus Bishop as CEO effective immediately for gross misconduct and misuse of company funds. Peterson Davies and Atherton, all of whom had been beneficiaries of Elara's quiet business network for years, raised their hands without hesitation. "The motion passes," Elara said briskly. "Unanimously. Marcus, you're fired." The silence in the Orion Club was no longer just a pause. It was a physical weight, a thick, suffocating pressure that seemed to suck all the air from the room. The music from the grand piano had died, the pianist's hands hovering over the keys frozen. 80 of the city's most powerful people stood as statues, their eyes locked on the triumvirate at the center of the room. The ruined king, the hysterical pretender, and the silent, new-crowned queen. Marcus Bishop's face was a canvas of ruin. The blood had drained from it, leaving a waxy, greyish pallor. His mouth was open, a soundless "oh" of disbelief. "Fired," he whispered the word, barely audible. It was a concept his brain simply could not process. Fired one did not fire Marcus Bishop. One was fired by Marcus Bishop. This was a joke, a nightmare. You bitch!" The scream ripped through the silence, raw and violent. It was Chloe. Her face, which moments ago had been smug with triumph, was now a grotesque mask of fury. This was not the plan. She had not schemed for months, had not endured this boring, passionless man to be humiliated by some dowdy society wife. "You lying bitch!" she shrieked again, and she lunged. She was fast fueled by pure, unadulterated rage. Her hands, with their long, blood-red nails, were aimed at Elara's face. She never even got close. It was not a scramble. It was a display of sheer, effortless professionalism. Two men in dark suits who had been standing impassively by the main staircase moved with a speed that was terrifying. They were not bouncers. They were executive protection. Before Chloe had taken her second step, one guard, a tall, broad-shouldered man named Thomas, had stepped in front of Elara, acting as a human shield. The other Aaron, built like a linebacker, intercepted Chloe mid-lunge. He didn't grab her. He caught her. His left hand encircled her right wrist. His right hand seized her left bicep. Her forward momentum was stopped so abruptly she was nearly lifted off her feet. There was a sickening, quiet pop as her shoulder joint was hyperextended. Let me go," she screamed, her voice cracking with pain and fury. "Get your hands off me. Marcus, do something. He's hurting me. Tell them who you are." Marcus didn't move. He couldn't. He was still staring at Elara, his mind a cascading avalanche of numbers and names. Vance Hospitality, Swiss Holding, Helveticus Capital, 51%. "Elara," he stammered, his voice hoarse. This is a joke. A very, very bad joke. Stop it. Stop this right now. You're embarrassing yourself." Elara looked at him, her grey eyes as cold and flat as a winter sea. "Embarrassing myself? No, Marcus. I don't think I am. I believe the board vote was quite clear. Mr. Peterson, Mr. Davies, Mrs. Atherton, was your vote unclear?" The three board members who had been standing near the window now looked at Marcus with a chilling mixture of pity and legal necessity. "The vote was clear, Marcus," said Peterson, a man who had played golf with him just last week. "You're out. I'm sorry, man." But business is business. Sorry, Marcus sputtered, finally finding a spark of his old anger. Sorry, you Judas. After everything I've done for you, that deal with Silverstone Properties. That was me. That deal, Elara cut in her voice, slicing through his tirade, was approved by Helveticus Capital, which I own. Mr. Peterson has been voting with my proxy for 3 years. He hasn't been your ally, Marcus. He's been my employee, as have all of you. That revelation hit Marcus harder than the firing. They all knew. The whole time. His friends, his colleagues, his wife. His entire life for the past 6 years had been a performance, and he was the only one who didn't have the script. Security, Elara said, her voice dropping to a brisk, businesslike tone. Remove them. No, Marcus roared, finding his footing. This was the second stage bluster. You can't just throw me out. This is my party. I'll sue you, Elara. I swear to God I will sue you for everything. I'll take you to the cleaners. You've forgotten, haven't you? You've forgotten the prenup, the one my lawyers at Sullivan and Cromwell drafted, the one you signed without even reading. A low murmur went through the crowd. The prenup, the ultimate weapon. Elara actually smiled. It was a thin, sharp, dangerous smile. Oh, Marcus, you sweet, arrogant fool. I haven't forgotten the prenup. I have it memorized. I read it last night, right after I read the quarterly reports for Bishop Dynamics. She took a step toward him, her voice light, almost conversational, as if she were discussing a museum exhibit. You're right. Your lawyers did draft it, and it's a beautiful piece of work. Truly ironclad. It states, and I quote from Article 3, Section 1A, "In the event of a dissolution of the marriage, all assets, properties, liquid and non-liquid, and holdings acquired prior to the marriage shall remain the sole and separate property of the original party." She ticked a finger in the air. Point 1. The Vance Hospitality Group, inherited from my father. That's mine. She ticked another finger. It also states in Section 1B, any assets, properties, or holdings acquired during the marriage by one party using that party's own separate and premarital funds or inheritance shall also remain the sole and separate property of the purchasing party. Her smile widened. Point 2. The Swiss holding company Helveticus Capital, purchased by me 6 years ago using funds from my father's trust, a trust that is legally separate from our marital assets. That Marcus is mine. She took another step. He involuntarily recoiled. Point 3. This building, the Orion, the penthouse we live in, everything, purchased by me 2 years ago as a flagship property for the Vance Group. Also, mine. She was standing directly in front of him now. Which brings us to the company. Bishop Dynamics, your baby. Since 51% of it is owned by Helveticus Capital. Well, you're a numbers man. You can do the math. That's mine, too. She tilted her head. So let's review your prenup, shall we? What does that leave you? It leaves you and I, quote Article 3 again, with all assets and properties you brought into the marriage, which, if I recall, consisted of a leased BMW 7 Series, a bachelor apartment in a mid-range building on the west side, and, oh yes, a truly staggering amount of self-confidence. The car was returned to the dealer in 2016. The apartment was sold to fund your initial stake in Dynamics. So Marcus, she leaned in her voice, dropping to a whisper that only he and the security guards could hear. You are left with your suits, your shoes, your golf clubs, And whatever is in your personal checking account, which, knowing your spending habits, is likely negligible. Marcus's entire body was shaking. He looked like a man who had just been thrown from a skyscraper. He couldn't breathe. But my accounts, he gasped, clutching at straws. My company cards. My bank. Mr. Bishop, Julian Vance said, stepping forward. His voice was polite, deferential, and utterly devoid of mercy. He was holding a sleek black tablet. As of your termination, which was processed, let's see, exactly 3 minutes ago, by our legal team downstairs, your access to all Bishop Dynamics accounts has been revoked. He tapped the screen. Your corporate black card cancelled. Your executive expense account frozen. Your company stock options, as per the termination for cause clause in your employment contract, which I might add, I drafted, they are null and void. The Bentley you arrived in. It's leased by the company. It will be remaining in our garage. Our valet will, of course, remove your personal effects from the glove box. This was it. The total systematic erasure of his life. No, he whispered. It was a plea. He turned to Alara, his eyes suddenly wet. The anger was gone, replaced by a desperate, pathetic panic. This was the third stage bargaining. Alara, please, we can talk about this. Downstairs, privately. 10 years, Alara. 10 years. It means something. We built this. I know I made a mistake. This thing with Chloe, it was stupid. A midlife crisis. You know. Please, Alara, don't do this. Not here, not in front of everyone. He was begging. Marcus Bishop, the shark, the Titan, was begging. Alara looked at him. Her expression didn't soften. If anything, it became harder. You're right, Marcus. 10 years. And in 10 years you never once saw me. You saw an assistant, a hostess, an accessory. You saw a quaint hobbyist who you could pat on the head while you went off to play CEO with my money. She gestured to Chloe, who was now sobbing a broken, whimpering sound, her face a mess of running mascara and snot. The guard, Aaron, was holding her up as if she were a misbehaving doll. You didn't make a mistake, Marcus. You made a choice. You chose to stand here in my building at a party I paid for and publicly humiliate me. You thought you were discarding me. You thought you could just throw me away. You were so keen on shedding old skin. You misidentified which one of us was the snake. You weren't the predator, Marcus. You were just the skin waiting to be shed. She turned away from him. The dismissal was so total, it was as if she had physically slapped him. Julian, she said. Continue. Right, Julian said, checking his tablet again, as if this were a simple inventory check. Ah, yes, there is one final asset, a condominium, Unit 28B, at the Residences at Avery Point, a lovely 3-bedroom purchased 3 months ago. At the mention of the condo, Chloe's panicked sobbing hitched. Her head snapped up, her eyes wide with a new dawning horror. A $3.2 million purchase. Julian continued, his voice echoing in the dreadful silence. A beautiful gift, I'm sure. Except you didn't buy it with your personal funds, Mr. Bishop. You bought it using the Bishop Dynamics Executive Expense and Discretionary Fund. Marcus's blood ran cold. That was a corporate investment, eh? A long-term executive rental, was it? Julian asked, raising an eyebrow. Because the deed is listed under Ms. Chloe Jennings, and the expense report, which you signed, lists it as market research and client relations, a rather creative term for it. He looked at Alara. As the new CEO, Mrs. Vance Bishop will of course have to decide whether or not to pursue criminal charges against you both for gross embezzlement and misappropriation of company funds. Our legal team seems to think it's a very winnable case. That was the word that shattered the last bit of Chloe's consciousness. Not just broke, not just homeless, jail. No! She shrieked a sound so inhuman it made several guests jump. She began to struggle with a wild, desperate strength. No, I didn't know, I swear to God, I didn't know. He told me it was a gift. He said it was his money. He said it was a sign-on bonus. I had no idea I'm innocent. She thrashed in Aaron's grip, her red nails clawing at his suit. Tell them, Marcus. Tell them you lied to me. Tell them I didn't know anything about the money. Tell them. Marcus Bishop just stood there, a hollow man. His eyes were dead. He couldn't help her. He couldn't even help himself. He was a ghost in a $1,000 suit. And Chloe saw it. She saw the emptiness. She saw that the shark she had attached herself to was just a deflated balloon. The love, the future, the power. It was all gone. And she was left holding the bag. Her face crumpled. The rage and denial dissolved into pure, abject terror. You bastard, she whimpered, her fight gone. You ruined me. You dragged me into this. I want a lawyer. I want to call my lawyer. You can't. You can't. You are, of course, free to call anyone you wish, Julian said smoothly. Just not from here. Thomas, Aaron, if you please. The two guards, their expressions impassive, began to move. They didn't drag. They propelled. Thomas took Marcus by the bicep. The man who had entered the building like a conqueror was now being marched out like a common drunk, his feet stumbling, his tie askew. Aaron half-carried, half-walked the sobbing, hyperventilating Chloe. They were not taken to the grand bronze elevators they had arrived in. They were marched past the grand piano, past the stunned guests, and toward a simple unmarked door beside the kitchen. This was the final, and perhaps most brutal, humiliation. As they were walked past the clusters of guests, the socialites and bankers did something worse than stare. They turned away. They turned their backs on Marcus, a collective, silent shunning. The social death was complete. Mrs. Atherton, the board member, turned to Alara, her face bright as if nothing had happened. "Well," she said, loud enough for Marcus to hear, "the trash is finally out. Alara, darling, you must give me the name of your new general counsel. Mine is getting so sluggish, and we must discuss the new acquisitions for the museum wing." Alara smiled a genuinely warm smile for the first time that night. "Of course, Cynthia. I'll have my assistant set a lunch. I'm thinking per se my treat." "Marcus," Chloe wailed one last time as the unmarked door was pushed open. "Marcus, don't let them do this." The door revealed not a hallway, but a cold, steel-paneled service elevator, the kind used for hauling garbage and laundry carts. Julian Vance pressed the call button. "Ground floor," he said to the guards, "which will deposit them in the service alley on 58th Street. I'm afraid they'll have to find their own way home. I would suggest a cab or an Uber, but... well..." He gestured to Marcus's pocket, where his now useless company cards resided. "That might be a problem." The guards pushed the two of them inside the freight elevator. The bright, garish red of Chloe's dress looked obscene against the dull, scratched steel. Marcus, his shoulders slumped, didn't even look up. "Good night, Mr. Bishop," Julian said, his voice laced with a final, pleasant dismissal. "Ms. Jennings." Marcus looked up just as the heavy doors began to slide shut. He locked eyes one last time with his wife. Elara was standing where he had left her in the center of the room. She was the picture of calm, of power, of absolute control. She was bathed in the warm, golden light of the chandeliers, and she was surrounded by her guests in her club. She didn't look angry. She didn't look triumphant. She just looked finished. She slowly raised her champagne flute, the one he had given her for their toast. She held it aloft, not in a toast to him, but in a final farewell at him. Then the heavy steel doors slammed shut with a definitive echoing clang. The lock engaged with a loud chunk. They were gone. The heavy metallic clang of the service elevator door echoed through the grand ballroom of the Orion Club. The lock sliding home was a sound of absolute finality, a full stop on a 10-year sentence. For a long, suspended moment, the entire room held its breath. The only sound was the faint, distant horn of a taxi on the street 50 floors below. 80 of the city's elite stood motionless, their champagne glasses frozen halfway to their lips. All eyes were on Elara. She stood alone in the center of the room, her back to the service door. She was still holding her champagne flute aloft, the pale gold liquid catching the light of the crystal chandeliers. She held the pose for 1, 2, 3 seconds. Then very slowly, she let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding for a decade. The tension flowed out of her shoulders. Her performance was at last over. She lowered her glass and turned to face her guests. Julian Vance, her cousin, her general manager, her loyal second-in-command, was the first to move. His face, which had been a mask of polite professional steel, broke into a smile of pure, unadulterated pride. He began to clap. It was a slow, deliberate, respectful applause. Then Mrs. Atherton, the sharp-eyed board member, joined him. Then Mr. Peterson, the man who had been Elara's proxy for years. Within seconds, the entire room erupted. This was not polite socialite applause. It was a thunderous, genuine rolling ovation. It was admiration. It was relief. It was the sound of an entire social and financial infrastructure realigning itself in real time around its new, undisputed center of gravity. Elara's eyes, for the first time that night, misted over. She had planned for the legalities, for the financials, for the security. She had not for one moment planned for this. She raised a hand, and the applause quieted. She looked around at the faces her true friends, her loyal board members, her dedicated staff. "My apologies," she said, and her voice was clear, but with a new warm timbre. The icy control was gone. "My apologies for the theatricality. It was not my intention to ruin your evening." Mrs. Atherton laughed a hearty, genuine sound. "Ruin it, darling. You've just made it the event of the decade. My God, that was better than Oppenheimer." A wave of laughter rippled through the room, finally decisively breaking the tension. The pianist, taking his cue, began to play again, not the somber classical piece from before, but a bright, upbeat jazz standard. The waitstaff, as if emerging from a spell, began to move once more, refilling glasses, offering decadent desserts. Elara raised her glass. "Well then," she said, her smile now reaching her eyes. "Marcus was right about one thing. This is a night for new beginnings, to clarity, and to the future, our future." "To Elara," Julian toasted, raising his own glass. "To Elara," the room echoed. The party didn't just resume, it was reborn. The oppressive, ego-driven atmosphere Marcus had cultivated was gone, replaced by a palpable sense of excitement. People flocked to Elara, but they approached her differently. They didn't pat her arm and talk about sweet charities. They shook her hand and talked about my market projections. They didn't pity her. They admired her. She was no longer Mrs. Bishop, the appendage. She was fully and finally Elara Vance. At that exact moment, 50 floors down the service elevator, dinged. The contrast was a physical assault. The doors slid open not to a mahogany-paneled lobby, but to a cold, concrete vestibule. The air was not filled with piano music and champagne. It was filled with the rank, sour smell of 1,000 garbage bags and old grease. A single flickering fluorescent tube on the ceiling cast a buzzing, sickly yellow light. Marcus and Chloe stumbled out onto the cracked tile floor. Where are we? Chloe whimpered, clutching her arms. The thin red silk of her dress was no match for the sudden damp cold. A bored-looking night security guard, sitting on a wooden stool and reading a tabloid, looked up. "Service exit. You're in the alley on 58th. You can't be here. Move it along." You don't understand," Marcus stammered. He was on autopilot, his mind a white void of static. I'm Marcus Bishop. I live here." The guard looked him up and down the $1,000 suit, the disheveled hair, the hollow, shell-shocked eyes. "Yeah, pal. And I'm Batman. I said beat it. I'm not paid to deal with the overflow from the party." He pointed to a heavy, steel-plated door. "That's the alley. Don't let it hit you on the way out." Chloe, her terror momentarily eclipsed by her rage, turned on Marcus. "This is your fault," she shrieked, her voice echoing horribly in the small, concrete room. "You told me. You said you were a king. You said you had everything. You're nothing. You're a fraud." She began to hit him, pounding her small fists against his chest. "You ruined me. You dragged me into this embezzlement. They're going to put me in jail. I'm not going to jail for you. Do you hear me? You ruined my life." Marcus didn't even react. He didn't raise his arms to block her. He just stood there, absorbing the blows. His eyes staring blankly at the "Employees must wash hands" sign on the wall. He was gone. The man he thought he was had been executed in front of 80 people. This was just the shell. The guard sighed, rolled up his tabloid, and stood. "All right, that's enough. Out. Now." He shoved the steel door open, revealing the alley. It was raining. Not a gentle rain, but a cold, miserable, wind-driven drizzle that turned the city's grime into a slick black paste on the cobblestones. Steam rose from a nearby manhole. The alley was lined with mountains of black garbage bags and rows of dented, overflowing dumpsters. A large rat skittered from one pile to the next. "Go on," the guard said, jerking his thumb. Chloe, blinded by tears of mascara and rage, stumbled out first. Her stiletto heel, designed for plush carpets, immediately sank into the gap of a storm drain. She twisted her ankle, crying out in pain, and fell, catching herself on the hood of a parked, filth-covered truck. Her red dress was now smeared with grime. Marcus shuffled out after her, like a man walking to the gallows. The steel door slammed shut behind them. The click of the bolt was as final as the one on the elevator. They were alone. In the dark. In the rain. My purse," Chloe sobbed, pulling out her phone. The screen was cracked from her fall. "I left my purse upstairs." "My phone. The battery is at 2%. Marcus, call. Someone call an Uber. Call your driver." Marcus mechanically reached into the pocket of his bespoke suit. He pulled out his top-of-the-line smartphone. He pressed the power button. Nothing. He pressed it again, holding it down. The screen remained black. It was dead. Utterly, completely dead. He remembered Julian's voice. "Your access has been revoked." It wasn't just the accounts. Ilara's tech team had remotely wiped and bricked his corporate phone, his corporate tablet, and his corporate laptop the second the board vote was finalized. He was digitally excommunicated. It's dead," he whispered, the rain dripping from his hair onto the useless black rectangle in his hand. Chloe let out a sound. It was not a scream. It was a raw, animal wail of pure, hopeless despair. She looked at the useless, broken man before her. She looked at her ruined dress, her throbbing ankle, her dying phone. She saw the truth. She had attached herself to a parasite, mistaking it for a host. And the host had just flicked them both off. She turned away from him. She didn't say another word. She kicked off her useless, expensive heels and began to run barefoot down the stinking alley toward the distant light of the street. She was a survivor. She would disappear. She would find another host. Marcus Bishop was left alone. He slowly, woodenly sank down until his back hit the cold, wet brick wall. He slid down heedless of the garbage and filth and sat on a pile of sodden cardboard boxes next to a dumpster. The man who just 3 hours ago had been the toast of the town sat in a dark alley in the rain with nothing. He had lost his company, his wife, his mistress, his homes, and his name all in the space of a 10-minute toast. Ilara did not return to the penthouse that night. She stayed at her private residence on the top floor of the Orion Club, the one Marcus never knew existed. She slept for 10 hours, a deep, dreamless sleep. She awoke to the sun streaming through her floor-to-ceiling windows, the entire city spread out below her like a kingdom. Her personal phone was buzzing on the nightstand, not with panicked calls from friends, but with alerts from Bloomberg. The Wall Street Journal and Forbes. The story had broken. Vance heiress stages boardroom coup, ousts husband Marcus Bishop from namesake company. The ultimate hostile takeover inside Ilara Vance's 10-year plan. She drank her coffee, read the stories, and smiled. They'd gotten most of it right. At 9:00 a.m., she arrived at the headquarters of Bishop Dynamics. She had not been to the building in over a year. The security guard at the front desk, a man named Robert, snapped to attention. "Good morning, Mrs. Vance Bishop. Congratulations." "Good morning, Robert," she said, smiling and using his name. Marcus had never known his name. "Has our guest arrived?" "Yes, ma'am," Robert said, his eyes glinting. "He tried to get in at 7:00 a.m., said he was the CEO. I showed him the new directory." Ilara looked at the massive digital screen in the lobby, where it had once read, Marcus Bishop, CEO and founder. It now read, Ilara Vance, Bishop Chairwoman and CEO. "He's, waiting across the street, ma'am. He seems upset." Ilara glanced out the glass doors, and there he was, Marcus. Still in his suit from last night, now crumpled, damp and stained. His hair was plastered to his head. He was trying to use a payphone. He was shouting into the receiver. He was locked out. Literally. "Thank you, Robert," Ilara said, and she strode to the elevator bank, which opened instantly at the tap of her new keycard. She rode up to the CEO's office. His office. It was a monument to his ego. Dark mahogany, heavy leather chairs, walls covered in trophies and photos of himself shaking hands with other powerful men. Her new assistant was already there. "Good morning, ma'am." "Good morning," Elara said, walking to the massive desk. "My first order. Get a design team in here. I want all of this gone." She swept her hand across the room. "All of it. I want glass and light and modern art. And send a crew to the lobby. Ma'am, I want the name Bishop Dynamics chiseled off the wall. This is a Vance company now. Rebrand it as Vance Urban Development." She sat down in his large leather chair. It was surprisingly comfortable. "Second, contact our legal team. I want them to file the embezzlement charges against both Mr. Bishop and Ms. Jennings, and freeze the deed on that condo. We're seizing it as a company asset." "And Mr. Bishop?" the assistant asked. "He's been trying to call all morning." "His lawyers will eventually contact ours," Elara said, booting up her new computer. "He signed a prenup that leaves him with nothing. However, the prenup also had an infidelity clause he forgot about, which he is in breach of. But I'm feeling generous. Tell the legal team to offer him a one-time severance payment, $50,000. In exchange, he signs a permanent ironclad NDA and waives all future claims. It's more than he deserves, and it's less than the cost of a lawsuit. It's just clean." The divorce was the fastest in New York high society history. Marcus faced with jail time for embezzlement, and a legal team that could bury him for decades took the deal. He signed the papers, took the check, and vanished. The last Elara ever heard, he was living in a small rented apartment in Tampa, Florida, selling timeshares. He had aged 20 years. He was quiet. He was broke. He was, in a word, irrelevant. Chloe Jennings had disappeared from the alley and never looked back. Warrants for her arrest were issued, but she was never found. It was assumed she'd used the last of the money and jewelry Marcus had given her to buy a new identity and flee the country. 6 months later, the cover of Forbes magazine did not feature a man. It featured Elara Vance Bishop, standing in her new light-filled office, the city skyline behind her. The headline read, "The Phoenix Tycoon: How Elara Vance Turned Her Husband's Empire into Her $10 billion Inheritance." She had restructured the entire company, cut all of Marcus's vanity projects, and with her strategic patient leadership, doubled its profits in the first 2 quarters. Her new dawn had truly begun. She was no longer the quiet wife. She was the one who had proven that the quietest person in the room is often the most powerful. And she was quite simply the boss. And so Marcus and Chloe were cast out, not just from the Orion Club, but from the life they had tried to steal. The heavy clang of the service elevator door was the final punctuation on a decade of lies. Elara, standing tall under the stars of her rooftop, raised her glass to her true friends and to a future she had meticulously built in the shadows. The ultimate karma isn't just revenge. It's resilience. It's not just winning. It's thriving. She didn't just take back her life. She took back her name, her company, and her power, proving that the best laid plans are not the loudest, but the most patient. Thank you for listening to this story. If you enjoyed this tale of dramatic twists and hard-earned justice, please don't keep it a secret. Hit that like button. Share this video with someone who loves a good story. And most importantly, subscribe to the channel for more content just like this. We have new stories coming every week, and you won't want to miss what happens next. Click that bell icon so you're always notified. Until next time.